working in buildings and research are members. So many of the big universities are members. And the particular group that I am coordinating is called Smart and Sustainable Built Environments. So it's W116, Smart and Sustainable Built Environments. And we run a whole range of initiatives around research, around capacity development, really to encourage more research around some of the kind of key issues to do with sustainability, to do with technology. So just to give you a feel for that, we're running a conference called SASBE 2024 in Auckland, in New Zealand this year. Next year, we'll have another conference in Lille, in France, the following year in Korea. So we're having it's an annual set of conferences. So if any of you are doing research or interested in seeing research in this area, it's very easy to put in a paper or join the conference. And we always include an online component to make it accessible and affordable, so you don't have to necessarily travel to the conferences. The second thing we do is the SASBE journal, and this is very quickly grown over the last few years. It's one of the top-rated building research journals. So again, if you've got good research, please consider that journal, and the different special editions that you can put in your paper for. The third thing we do is a competition. So we've been running this for the last 2 years, and we're gradually evolving it. And it's really aimed at students and their lecturers working in the built environment. So both architecture students, but also construction, QSs, engineers, etc. And what we're doing is to really kind of focus on sustainable housing in inner cities, and looking at ideas, looking at innovation on how you can develop improved housing and make it affordable, make it sustainable. So that's been very interesting, and we're going to be sharing the winners of that conference in next month. But again, look out for that for next year. And if you're teaching, I hope you encourage your students to be part of that. It's very multidisciplinary. It's one-page A1 entries, and we're hoping that we start generating a lot of very interesting ideas. So the last one that I'm going to come to is the SASBE seminars, and these are the seminars that we're now part of, and these run throughout the year. And the structure of these seminars is that you have 3 or 4 lecturers, researchers, presenters working in different areas, that will share their work for about 15 to 20 minutes. And then there's an open discussion. And what we've tried to do is really get a theme, or set of ideas, and make sure that there's some differing perspectives across a particular topic. And if anyone in the audience has ideas for a SASBE seminar, they're welcome to get in touch with Jan Hugo from University of Pretoria, or me. And what we then do is we'll put together a program, we'll find a slot, and then the CIB advertises this, and we will then run it. So it's quite easy, quite informal, and usually a very interesting exercise to kind of get your research shared globally. So I'm going to now move on to this particular seminar, and I'm hoping that Jan has been able to get the presentations and can present that soon. So it looks like that's working. Great.
Yes.
Jan, can you hear us? And yes, we can hear you. Okay.
You can hear
So I'm
me
going
and
to
I
say,
can hear you.
Fantastic. I'm going to say a last couple of things, and then I'm going to hand over to Jan. So I'm very glad to see him here. So Jan is the coordinator really of these SASBE seminars, and he may share a little bit more about some of the future ones that we're planning. From my side, I'm very excited by this particular seminar for a number of reasons. I think first of all, they're all African, which is great. It's normally quite difficult to find really interesting local research. I'm very pleased about that. And then I think the two or three things that are really interesting about the quick snippets that I've read. The first is, this measuring and having kind of robust systems for measuring, because whenever you have an argument, discussion about something like air quality, you rely so heavily on good quality data. So I'm going to be very interested to kind of see what engineers been doing around this issue and how to monitor air quality in cities. Monika's presentation as well, the whole idea of kind of looking at youth and advocacy. And the UNEP, I've done a number of projects with UNEP, and that's one of the kind of major things that you need to do is to look at how you transform cities, environments, governments. It comes back to advocacy. So I'm going to be very interested to hear that. And the same with NGOs. How do you work with NGOs? How do you harness people and ideas to change the situation to move towards a much more sustainable environment? So from my side, thank you very much, and most welcome to the seminar. And I'm going to hand over to Jan. Thank you, Jan. I'm glad you're here.
Thank you very much, Jeremy, and thank you for all that are attending today's seminar session. I apologize for starting slightly late. Technology is always a trick to sort out. But before we start, I'll finish up at the end with some suggestions or some more information about the other seminars that we're planning. So maybe I'll leave it till the very end. So please do stay. But there are some others that's in the pipeline, and with a focus
Yeah,
on. I beg your pardon. Jeremy, you're quiet. Okay, I think I just missed it here. Hopefully it's not the connection on my side. Is it still working fine? Good. Okay, so for the first speaker that we'll be having today is Professor Engineer Bainomugisha from Makere University. Engineer, thank you very much for joining us. Let's see, can you share your screen? Let's see if that is possible. Otherwise, I will share from my side. I'm also on your presentation, so we can do it. But maybe we can just check. And we'd also like to just do a sound check and make sure we can hear you.
Yeah, mic check. Hi, yeah. I hope you can hear me.
We can hear you fine. Okay, good. And I will share from my side. And then just before we get started, just to introduce Engineer, I think it's important. Engineer has pioneered and leads several social impact tech and research initiatives, of which one is AirQo, which leverages the Internet of Things and artificial intelligence for environmental air pollution monitoring and analysis in African cities to foster resilient and healthy urban communities. I think this is really important for us to understand how we understand and deal with air quality and look into ways that we can leverage our technology here. So I think, Engineer, you really, I think, well positioned to start the discussion about the work that you're doing through AirQo. We're really looking forward to this. I'm going to switch my mic off and my camera, and then I will share from my side. So, Engineer, you can just say when I need to forward the screen again.
Right, thank you, Jan. Yeah, you can put in the presentation mode if that's possible. Yeah, but I can start as you do that. Yeah, good evening, everyone, or good morning, everyone. As I've been introduced, my name is Engineer Bainomugisha, and thank you, Jan, for inviting me to this seminar. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. I'm from AirQo, which is based in the Department of Computer Science at Makere University in Kampala, Uganda. And I'm going to talk about the work we've been doing on hyper local air quality monitoring in African cities, with AirQo. Just briefly about AirQo. Yeah, so AirQo is a research initiative that I started here at Makere University in 2015, which focuses primarily on technology development for air quality monitoring. You can move to the next slide, Jan. And our vision is very simple. We have a very simple but ambitious vision to deliver clean air in all African cities. And we do this by collecting, analyzing, and modeling air quality data to the highest standards, and work with many partners to reduce air pollution and also raise awareness. Next slide. Just to give you a little bit of an overview in terms of why are we monitoring air quality. Many of you might be already aware about this, the numbers in terms of the burden caused by exposure to dangerous levels of air pollution. And this is being one of the major issues in many cities across the world, in Africa, but also in many other cities across the world. I think the statistics from the World Health Organization quote a figure of about 99% of the cities having polluted air. And what we see is that particularly for African cities, we have limited data on the scale and magnitude of air quality, but also most of the traditional air quality monitoring stations are either considered expensive or just do not work well in some of the settings that they would need to be monitored in. Things like requiring to be powered up by constant main grid supply, which is a challenge in some of the locations where these kind of monitors are deployed. And the map there really shows the health burden across the world. I think this has been also recently updated. I think a couple of days ago, there was a state of air quality, the global air quality report that was released, which emphasizes the risk of air pollution exposure. Next slide. So just to talk about, specifically what we are working on at AirQo. So at AirQo, we are largely doing air quality monitoring and modeling for cities. We have a focus on African cities primarily, and we do three major things. One is we do air quality monitoring. Under that, we build custom air quality monitors to monitor air quality. We also build tools to support placement and optimization of sensors in the network. So given a city, for instance, can be able to take in different parameters like land use and many others, population density, and be able to suggest what is the optimal number of sensors to be deployed in a city. We also build tools, mostly machine learning based tools for quality assurance and calibration of sensor data to improve the reliability and the accuracy. The other aspect of the work that we do, we also built a lot of digital platforms to support access to air quality data, but also making this data available for researchers from public health and many other areas. So we have a number of digital platforms that we've developed, web-based mobile app, and kind of an interface that allows easy integration with other existing systems. And in the third category of the work that we do, we work with city authorities primarily, but also the national environmental regulators to see how we can inform policy and regulation around air quality issues, as well as improving the local capacity on managing air quality. We do also regular activities on awareness and education. Every year we run an air quality awareness week with many partners in the cities that we are operating in. And just there in the picture is just an example of an AirQo monitor being deployed in one of the locations that we have networks in. Next slide. So here I just wanted to give you a bit of more overview in terms of the monitors that we custom design called the Binos monitors. So these monitors are designed to be either portable or fixed on static objects. So for instance, there in the picture you see a monitor deployed on a motorbike, which is common form of transportation in the city here. It's kind of like gives us a sense on the exposure, the riders and the spatial variety of air quality across the city. So our devices can be are designed to be powered in different ways. For instance, if it's on a motorbike, powered by the alternator of the device. If it's in the field, powered by a solar panel. And also looking at different ways on how they can transmit data, like cellular data transmission, which is readily available in most of the African cities, but also being designed to kind of like ensure that they can minimize impact from dust, insects, weather, and many others. And so far we have deployed a big network of sensors in over 15 African cities in many countries, including Uganda, Kenya, Cameroon, Ghana, Madagascar, and many others. Next slide, please. Yeah, so just to emphasize that the data we collect is not really for our internal usage. We strongly believe that the data is as valuable as it is accessible. So we spent quite a bit of time building tools to ensure that we can strike a balance between access and utility of the data. Next slide. Yeah, and this is a kind of an abstract layout of the architecture of our systems. So we start off with a physical sensor network, which is deployed in a given city. So typically we take an approach, we focus on a city and we try to ensure that we have a network that's dense enough to actually give us a representative picture of the state of air quality in a given city. And then the data that we collect is streamed into cloud-based digital platforms, so where the calibration happens, and also ensure that this data is processed to be stored in big data stores. And then that data is eventually made accessible in a number of formats, either dashboards or mobile app, as well as the programming interfaces for other systems. Next slide. Yeah, and this is kind of like an instantiation of the same picture there. So really showing how an air quality monitor looks like being deployed in the field. And what we see is there, the map next, the map of Africa kind of shows the places where we have a network of sensors. So these sensors is a mixture of reference grade monitors, as well as the Binos AirQo monitors. We have some of the reference monitors primarily for collocation and calibration of the wider high resolution air quality monitors. And I mentioned earlier we have a coverage in many countries across the continent. And then what we see there is an example of like a dashboard, which was designed with one of our city authorities here. So we worked closely with the city authority, try to understand the requirements in terms of the data access, and then we build a digital platform to custom made to meet their needs. And then we have a mobile app, which is more public facing. So people can actually be able to check. It has an built-in like focused models to see how the air quality might be like in the next few days. Next slide. Yeah, thanks. So here I'm just going to walk you through quickly some of the use cases beyond the digital platforms. For instance, we have this collaboration with one of the national television stations that consumes our data, and they broadcast it in the daily bulletin. So the public is kind of able to kind of get a sense on what the state of air quality is, but also importantly, really raising awareness of air quality amongst the public, because awareness levels are still very low in the public. So it's very important we are kind of leveraging some of these digital public platforms to be able to increase access and awareness. Next slide. Yeah, this is just another example of how our data can be used. For instance, the Nairobi City County government, the consumer our interface, and integrate this in the City County website. Again, here to give the public, the citizens of Nairobi, easy access to, air quality across the city. And this is kind of what, each of the dots there on the map basically represents, one of our sensors in the city. And the color kind of indicates the quality of air. So the green means it will be green, yellow will be kind of moderate, and red is considered unhealthy. So we have done this kind of integrations with many other cities in Lagos, in Kampala, and others. Next slide, please. Yeah, so this is the last example I just wanted to highlight in terms of the use cases for the AirQo data. So this particular use case is was exciting for us. We worked for a long time with the national regulator, and just last month, in the picture there is the Minister of Environment launching the national air quality regulations, of which we've played an important role to provide like an analysis of the state of air quality across the country, and also informing what would be like the acceptable interim targets for the regulation. Yeah, thank you. I think that's all I wanted to highlight. I'll be looking forward to the discussion for the rest of the session. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer. Thank you for the lovely presentation. I'm just going to stop sharing the screen here for a minute. If anybody has any questions, you're welcome to jot it down. Also post it in the Q&A or in the chat box. We'll have time afterwards to pose the questions and have a discussion with the whole group in terms of the work that they are doing. Good. While I am downloading the last presentation, let's just see, Monika, you did send it to me, so let me just get it. Just a minute. There we go. I'm busy downloading it, and while I'm downloading it, and opening it up, I'll introduce the next speaker for us. Good. So moving on, where we started out with the question about how data collection works and innovation in that space. The next speaker is Dr. Monika Kamkuemah. She's a postdoctoral fellow from the Department of Architecture with a joint appointment with the Innovation Africa at UP. So Monika and I met each other a while ago. It's so nice to have this presentation now. She obtained a PhD at the School of Public Health and Family Medicine at the University of Cape Town, and explored non-communicable disease and multimorbidity in adolescents and youth living with HIV in urbanization and the transition thereof. So Monika has been doing quite a lot of work in urban health, the built environment, nutrition, ensuring city resilience and future-proofing of our cities, and making sure it's really human-centered in how the design is taking place. So the next presentation is, I think, moving along in terms of how we take this to the people, I suppose. So I'm just opening this up for you, Monika, and then we will be able to get started. Once we've got my screen up, I'm going to share. And there we go. I think you can see the screen now. And Monika, can you just check your mic and see if that is working? We can hear
hello,
you
everyone.
fine. Great.
Okay.
Thank you, Monika. Good.
Thank you for the introduction, Jan. And yeah, I'm so glad to follow after Engineer, actually, because he's been monumental in the work we've done, or AirQo has been monumental in the work we've done as UrbanBetter. Next slide, Jan. Okay. So I often start with a question of how old do people think is the median age in Africa? But I guess I can't really get an audience reaction today. But it's actually 19 years. So basically, Africa's population is predominantly young. If we think about the fact that 50% of the population are actually aged between basically 0 to 19 years. And then also what's been happening is that over 50% of Africans are actually expected to be living in cities by 2050. So we have two colliding phenomena happening, a very young population and a rapidly urbanizing population as well. Next slide. So if we think about air pollution in African cities, the rapid urbanization is often quoted as the predominant source of air pollution because of the resulting industrial growth that happens, the reliance on fossil fuels. As people move from rural to urban areas, they're more likely to not have access to all the amenities, so they might rely on burning firewood for both subsistence and warmth. As well as growing traffic congestion, as more and more people rely on living in urban areas where they need to actually go to work, and there might not be many walkable environments in the cities. So the figure on the right just displays the contributions from key sources of PM 2.5 in 5 African countries, where you can see it's mostly energy from the energy sector, so industrial activities, but also if we think about phenomena like harmattan, which we know occurs in areas like Kenya, Nigeria. We see as well that wind-blown dust contributes to PM 2.5 as well. I think in 2019, it was established that 1.1 million premature deaths occur annually in Africa due to poor air quality. And this has actually surpassed causes like malnutrition and infectious diseases. So on top of that, as Engineer also highlighted in his presentation, is that we have inadequate monitoring of air quality. As of 2017, in West Africa, we only had one reference grade monitor for 10 million people. And this was even worse in Eastern Africa, where it was reported that there was one reference grade monitor for 100 million people. Reference grade monitors are very expensive. And as Engineer also talked about, they're not always suitable for the environments in a lot of African cities. Next slide. So on top of this, what I thought about in the work we've been doing is that there's actually an untapped resource of young people. So there's been a growth in youth-led climate activism. This started with global movements like Fridays for Future and Extinction Rebellion, where young people have basically been voicing that they are the ones who are going to face the dire consequences of climate change and air pollution, and therefore they need to have a voice in the negotiations that happen around sustainability and climate change and air quality monitoring. So African youth have also been very vocal in regards to this. We're focusing on sustainable development and biodiversity conservation. As we think about, for example, populations, indigenous populations in a lot of African countries who are being displaced, and young people who are now predominantly the ones moving to cities. How will we ensure sustainability in light of this? And what we've seen is that youth can actually lead transformative action, not only with advocacy, but also with harnessing technology in order to advocate for themselves. Next slide. So as UrbanBetter, we use an approach called precision advocacy. So we believe that participatory measurement with youth and with communities can contribute to participatory governance, which can then be used to ensure healthy, climate resilient public spaces in cities. Next slide. So UrbanBetter basically is an Africa-led global movement. We hope that by sparking an African bonfire, we can actually light fireworks in the broader global community and global movement, which can then accelerate building healthy, climate resilient urban spaces. Just a disclaimer, we're still very much in the beginning of this. So we've started with an advocacy approach where we hope to, we have actually highlighted the issue. And then with partners like AirQo, for example, we're then building the momentum and using that technology to actually then lead to data-led, evidence-informed advocacy. Next slide. So our vision is that in line with Africa Vision 2063, we hope to have every large urban infrastructure initiative designed with health and climate resilient in consideration, in order to then revision cities in African countries where we'll have participatory community-led mechanisms, and also to then support intergenerational dialogues that will allow kind of like a participatory decision-making process. And in that way, then we can then look towards building resilient, healthy communities. Next slide. Next slide, I'll skip this one. It's marketing. Next slide. So I wrote a paper. We recently wrote a paper highlighting this, that youth have often been left out of a lot of decision making. For example, within not only national kind of decision making, like in governance structures, but also just looking at local movements and local authorities, like how often are youth voices actually taken into account. So we want to harness the power of youth, combining it with public health. So using physical activity in the form of harnessing public spaces and walkable environments to actually then promote physical activity, and combining that with citizen science. So citizen science includes both the measurement of it and what we call thick data. So adding lived experience and perceptions onto the more quantitative data that's collected to actually then add insight into the dynamically changing environments. And with these combination of these approaches, we then hope to make the urban better. Next slide. Okay, I think I'll just briefly talk over this. So basically, I want to highlight the participatory mechanisms of engaging youth in decision making. So what we actually do, we do youth-led activations, and we combine that with raising awareness within the community on health and climate risks in public space. So what we see with a lot of rapidly urbanizing cities is that urban planning doesn't necessarily always work, because like things and structures will basically evolve and arise overnight. So a lot of the time you actually need to have more of a dynamic sensing approach to be able to identify like dynamic exposures that happen in the environment. So we thought, why not combine that with young people who are actually there in the communities? And before we actually do like a formal research, like having an ethics approval and all that beforehand, why not use the youth that are, not use, that's not the right word, but why not harness the power of the youth that are there to then actually inform what's happening and to collect that data in real time. So the collected data and the insights, we then combine into how we can identify, for example, high sources of air pollution or environmental risks that emerge. And then they form the basis then for evidence-informed advocacy. And with a co-design approach then, together with community residents that are mobilized in the community, we then use these informal networks and services to reach underserved populations and reach decision makers. Next slide. This is just, you can skip this, sorry, next slide. If anyone is interested, you can see more of the approach we used in this video. I'll just share the link afterwards. But basically, we piloted this approach in 3 cities where we had some inroads in terms of local government authorities and also like existing youth networks. And since the campaign in 2022, we've managed to scale the model and are now working more concentratedly within Lagos and Accra after what basically was a spin-off from the success of the first campaign. Next slide. Okay, you can skip this one. Next slide. Okay, so I wanted to talk more about urban governance and youth engagement in particular. So from the first campaign in 2022, we managed to come up with a few policy briefs that we shared with local authorities in Cape Town, Accra, and Lagos, which were the 3 pilot cities. What was interesting with this process was that local government, like municipality decision makers, came to a workshop that we invited them to, and they engaged with the youth on the findings and also on the existent policies and plans that the city governments had devised. So it emerged that a lot of the time there had just not been any platform for that dialogue. So the youth were unaware of air quality management plans. They were unaware of, for example, solid waste management policies in the cities. So it was actually the first time that a lot of them had interfaced with these regulations and with local authorities. So we also saw then that there was an important opportunity to actually have a dialogue. And the other thing that we wanted to highlight was also that a lot of times things like interventions will be done and they will inform youth rather than actually involving them. So with UrbanBetter and the Citizens for Clean Air campaign particularly, we wanted to move away from tokenism and actually have true collaboration where we had active participation from both sides and we had actionable points that followed out from after that. So one of the great successes from that was managing to secure a follow-on grant from the US State Department. This was facilitated in collaboration with AirQo as well. So what emerged was that there was funding available now for 30 low-cost air quality sensors to be rolled out in Lagos and in 4 other cities. And then on top of that, the youth are then actually using the data and the insights from the low-cost sensors to design follow-on activations, which they supplement with wearable air quality data. And on top of that, we've also had then the collaboration with the Lagos State Environmental Protection Agency, where the officials have been very active in the campaigns that are currently ongoing. We had a World Environment Day run in which the officials from LASEPA also joined us. And there's like ongoing collaboration and dialogue between the young citizens and the Lagos state. So this is just a picture of a meeting in April where they actually visited the general manager of LASEPA, and they basically baptized him as a urban better citizen. Next slide. This is just an illustration of the policy briefs that were devised in each city. So these were contextual, so they were relevant for each city, and they were devised by the youth. And they were actually done then, and the recommendations were then actually given and fed back to local authorities. Next slide. You can actually just breeze through the next 2 slides. So there were policy recommendations for each city, Accra, Cape Town, and then Lagos. This was in 2022. Next slide. Next slide. Yeah, so this is just, so basically what I was talking about earlier about using technology and participatory data gathering. So on top of that, the data gathering, we then derive insights from the data gathering. And then I think in the current world with AI and machine learning techniques, there's definitely more opportunity for actually harnessing this more effectively. And then this can then be used for policy change and youth-led activism. Next slide. Just some recommendations emerging from our experience so far. I guess increasing air quality monitoring will always be something that's highlighted as a limitation. And even if there are no reference grade monitors available, which are often cited as the gold standard, but low-cost techniques work as well, and they can be used then to inform like decisions, because you can't actually manage what you don't measure. And then we also thought about enhancing and supporting meaningful youth engagement, not only tokenistically, but in a way that's actually beneficial on both fronts. And also then facilitating platforms for youth, for young people to actually engage also with policymakers. And we also thought about adopting participatory approaches. Very often in research, we have a top-down approach where a researcher comes with an agenda and tells the community what's important to them. But we have proper buy-in and true empowerment. It's actually necessary to co-design processes with the community. And another thing was fostering government collaboration. One thing I realized was often people want to scapegoat government and say they're not doing X, Y, and Z. Ways it's more fruitful or productive to actually both come to the table and meet, like, not to factionalize, but rather discuss ways in which you can collaborate. Next slide. I think that's my last slide, actually. Yeah, thank you. I look forward to the questions.
Thank you very much, Monika, for a lovely presentation. I think this is really inspiring in the way that that you show the processes of providing a platform for individuals or groups that are often marginalized in this process. If anybody has any questions or comments, just note it down or answer or put it in the chat box. We'll get to it afterwards. We're a small group, so we should be able to have a nice discussion afterwards. In the meantime, I'm just downloading Olamide's presentation, who will be our last presenter for this evening, and I'll introduce her now.
Hi, Jan. Sorry, do you want me to try to share it on my end? Would that be easier for you, or should I try?
You can certainly try. Let's see if it works.
Okay.
Olamide, we can see your screen, so you are sharing. It seems to be working well. So you'll find it. It's great. There we go. Okay, perfect. So let me just introduce you, and then we can continue. Olamide Ejorh is the director of the Lagos Urban Development Initiative. She's currently involved in governance and social issues within the urban environment of Lagos, and is an advocate for sustainable transportation and social engagement within urban spaces, with a particular focus on gender. She focuses on transport management, slum upgrading, housing rights in urbanizing African cities, and she's consulted with the UN Habitat on the Nigerian projects for the Global Future Cities program. And in the last 10 years, she managed and coordinated multiple projects in the UK, South Africa, and Nigeria, and working with a variety of communities and organizations to ensure that urban planning is a participatory process from inception to maintenance. Olamide, thank you. I think this is such a great point to move towards in terms of how we get the community involved and actively part of the process. Thank you.
Sorry, let me unmute and go back to my slides. Okay, great. So thank you very much. And I think Yeah, we've had two fantastic presentations, and I think they're both great examples of how we can use data to really kind of talk about talk about the issues that are on the ground. My presentation is going to be looking at some assessments that we did last year on walkability in 5 different communities or neighborhoods in Lagos. So just a little bit of background. I'll be talking about Lagos, and it's estimated that about 65% of Lagos population are actually the urban poor, and most of those people do rely on public transport system for their daily commute, and 52% of households in Lagos own no car. So, which means they're relying on walking and then public transport. And the MATA, which is the Lagos Metropolitan Transport Authority, showed that 80% of all daily passengers trips were made by public transport, including walking. So there is a lot of time that people are spending walking to public transport, but also in walking to and from their houses to schools and so on. And so in 2015, Lamata did mention, have recorded that, sorry, a demand for trips in Lagos region by all modes, including walking, was estimated at 22 million per day, with walking trips accounting to 40% of those total trips. So walking, of course, is what happens already. So when we're talking about like climate change or climate resilience, or reducing air quality, there are a lot of people already walking. So the aim here is not necessarily the aim here is not necessarily to get people from their cars to walking. Of course, that would also be great for the rest who are still doing that. But the aim here is to also make walking and cycling more accessible. So that, people who have maybe challenges with walking, how are they walking through the city? And we can see from some of these pictures that people who are walking are also competing with cars, with public transport, crossing the road with no pedestrian safety, walking in really kind of very hazardous environments. So we really wanted to try to capture what's happening on the ground, so that there is evidence. Because whenever we go to the Lagos State Metropolitan Transport Authority, we usually get, so where's the evidence for this? Where, how is, can you tell me how many people are walking or cycling in this environment? And so we really wanted to try to get that evidence so that we can show what's really happening on the ground. So we worked in 5 different neighborhoods: Lagos Island, Ikorodu, Owoshoki, Ikeja, and University of Lagos. And before we started the assessment, we did some training within community members. So they chose, we went to the community leaders, they chose a group of people, or they volunteered to come for the training. They came for the training, and then we now went into their community. So I don't live in Ikeja, but the other areas I don't live in, I don't know them very well. So we had to make sure that people who know their environment, who have a stake in their environment, are also participating and understanding what's happening. And so the tool that we used was a tool that was developed by the oh gosh, I forgot the name now, but it's a transport initiative in Kenya, and they developed this, and it works very well for Lagos because it has certain things that we may not necessarily find in maybe other contexts. So we have to also think about the context that we're in. So sometimes with kind of these kind of tools that you find, there is a need to contextualize it, to maybe add or take away some questions. But we found the tool quite indicative of what we found on the ground in Lagos. So the indicators are here, 1 to 11. So from walkways to shade and shelter, to prioritizing connectivity, access to local services, and also the roadway area. And what things that we may find that may differ, let's say from a European perspective, is also like people selling on the street, and these kind of things that are maybe different to context specific. So here are some of the results that we found. And I'm not going to go through everything, but I just wanted to show just a summary of what was found, and I'll just talk through them. So at the University of Lagos, small blocks, actually for all the neighborhoods that we went through, small blocks was something that was quite, was regarded as not present. So from the for the people who do the assessment. And small blocks are basically, how far do you have to go to access certain parts, and how far do you have to go to like cross the road and things like that. And so some of this information is very good for also the urban planners, because it starts to think about, connectivity, but also active frontage. So for example, are there eyes on the street? Is there houses or shops that are facing the street? Are there people around? Till what time? So those kind of questions also are quite important. Lighting, shade and shelter, as I mentioned. If I think anyone that lives, around the equator, when there's, rainfall, it's not, it's very serious. So, these things are also very important. We actually did the University of Lagos walkability assessment in the rain, which clearly showed that that there's a need for shade and shelter. And so these were the results from Oworoshoki and Lagos Island, and also from Ajegunle and Ikeja. So these are, yes, as I mentioned, this was the different the images of the different areas that we walked through and did the assessment. And here are some of the community members on the walk with their phones. And we also had a paper one, because we knew that some people might not have phones, and so we wanted to make sure that it's accessible to everybody. And then what we did is collate all the data from the paper and the phone, and then put them into those graphs that I showed above. So as I mentioned, at Unilag, we did it on a day where it was raining, and you have things like open gutters, as well as flooding and things like that, which will hinder walking. So just quickly in terms of the summary, so of course at the University of Lagos, they demonstrated actually really good results for walkability, and it's a campus university, so it would have kind of walking facilities. So for example, we had zebra crossings that I showed in the image above, but of course but there were still a lot of things that were lacking to ensure safety and security, as well as I mentioned, shelter. And then with Lagos Island, they have a lot of crosswalks and road prioritization. There are still areas for improvement. So in terms of block sizes, they're quite large. And then with a growing population, we need to enhance the overall pedestrian experience. And then Ajegunle, it really revealed the potential for growth and walkability. But key areas for development included walkways for safe mobility, facilitating physical permeable frontage, promoting complementary land use, and reducing travel distance. And then for Oworoshoki, again, of course, room for improvement. I think you find this all over the world anyway. There's always room for improvement. But active frontage, optimizing block sizes, and really kind of think about the distance people have to walk for services. So these findings have all provided a valuable insight into the current state of walkability. And what we've done with the findings is we've developed a report which we've shared back with the community people, the people that took part in it, the leadership as well. And then it's for them to kind of really use that as an advocacy tool. And what we then also did was we had a workshop kind of showing them how they can use this kind of data for advocacy, which was earlier this year. So I wanted to talk a little bit about what the role of like an NGO or LUDI's role has been in this process of kind of collecting data and using it for advocacy. So NGOs can collect data, but also we need to bring citizens together to collect data. And I think this is really powerful, that the data is not in just the NGOs' hands, but in the citizens themselves. And this allows for the data to be accessible. So though we've done five neighborhoods, it's important, which we've tried to now promote to all CDAs, the importance of collecting this data and how to use the tool. And so that it's not something that sits in our hands or sits in very few hands. Then showing the importance of data, so not just about collecting data for data's sake, or to give to researchers, but also collecting data for advocacy and collecting data, and the people who are collecting data, so the citizen scientists, for example, shown like even in the UrbanBetter project, they're actively using the data and understanding the data, and I think that's also critical when working with communities and neighborhoods, and community leaders and so on, to understand what the data they're collecting could be used for and what it is. And of course, as I mentioned, using the data for advocacy tools. And I think what we've also tried to do is improve communication and bringing people together. So not just okay, we're working with communities, but okay, who are we advocating to? Who are we talking to? How are we bringing the city government into these discussions? Are the people who are most marginalized also heard? Most of the people who took part in these assessments are able-bodied, but are we hearing from those who are not able-bodied? Things like that as well, and how can we bring them into the conversation? And then NGOs have, well, not all, but we at least are working really at the grassroots level, and at the local level. And so we have an opportunity to support the public sector, delivering some kind of support as well. So I think we sit at that kind of a middle or a negotiating, maybe not negotiating, but a middle table where we can really, as I said, bring people together and support where we can on both sides. Because especially, I'm going to talk for Lagos specifically, the tools are not always available to collect data. The expertise, the capacity, the numbers are not always there to collect data all over the a city state of over 20 million people. We don't have the capacity to measure and to be everywhere at the same time. So, organizations like LUDI can support this as well. But then we sit at a point where we are institutionally independent. And so we have some political neutrality, and this also allows again to bring people together to organize. Bring people together and organizations together from kind of hopefully a neutral perspective. And also there's some flexibility and ability to innovate, and try to think specifically to goals, but try to understand the goals of the communities that we work in, so that we're all working together, to support them, not that we're coming there with our already, ideas, and a dedication to kind of complete the work. And again, this has to do with funding, and I think Monika did mention about ongoing funding, and that can sometimes be an issue when you start a project. And then the funding kind of stops at some point, and who is left who's left to do the rest of the work. So that's also something that we, as NGOs, need to also work on in terms of working with funders to explain the continuity of projects, the need for continuity of projects when you're dealing with the grassroots level. So that's it from me. Thank you very much. Yeah, thank you. And back to you. I'm going to stop sharing my screen.
Olamide, thank you very much. Thank you for sharing this work, which I think is so important that we understand the lived experience of individuals. And I can clearly see that there's, apart from air quality, there's just this understanding of the built environment and how that affects the our experience, or the user's experience. I think if I can ask you to just stop sharing your screen as well. I think, or I could also find a button to do that.
Yes, I can't find
it. Let's see. No, I cannot. I can just right at the top, right next to the big red button is, okay, there we go. Great. Okay, great. Thank you very much. Thank you for the questions so far. We've got a few questions, and I think before we, I think there's also questions from Jeremy, I'm sure, and I've got a few questions, but we've got a question already from Tau, and I think let's give the audience a chance with questions, and then we work from there. Tau, thank you for your question. I think first of all you're thanking the presenters, and then the question is, how much of partnership or buy-in do you have from cities and municipalities across Africa as to have these partnerships inform real policy? And have you done work where significant in mining towns or settlements where resources such as crude oil or gas flaring are explored to the detriment of citizens? And I think maybe that is a good question: is how do one balance the need for resources, but also then healthy and healthy built environments. Now, I'm going to let's leave. I see this wasn't for a specific person. I think it's slightly broad. Maybe let's start with engineer. I don't know if you would like to comment on that and see if there's a comment or response to that you'd like to give, and then if Monika or Olamide has an answer to that, you can also come in afterwards.
Yeah, thanks. Thanks, Jan, and thanks for that question. I'll speak more to the first part of the question, I think, which was asking more about the partnerships with cities and the successes. Yeah, and thanks to fellow panelists Monika and Olamide for kind of completing the cycle of kind of urban planning and management. For AirQo, one of the things that we do in terms of engagement is that we try to engage with responsible authorities who can actually put in place policies to take action, and city authorities is a major stakeholder. So for each city that we typically engage, one of the first contact points is to see that we establish engagements with the city authorities. It always starts off really with making them, using data to actually prioritize air pollution. I think the first thing is, at least from the AirQo perspective, is that we see that we can use data to kind of make some of these problems that are kind of invisible sometimes to the city leaders to become more apparent. So if you go to a city that is maybe promoting itself as a tourism city, but then they do not have air quality issues on their priority, so we try to kind of bring to the table to say, look, if you are promoting yourself as a tourism city, if you do not know the state of air quality, then this is likely to impact on the number of tourists coming to your city. So yes, we engage quite strongly with the city authorities. So for one, we think that some of the sustainable measures to improve air quality need to be institutionalized within the cities. So there has to be connection in the waste management, urban planning, as Olamide and Monika presented on earlier on. So we try to ensure that the data we collect can inform city air quality action plans, among many other things. Then the other aspect, of course, is the national government, whereas the cities have very specific mandates, but usually you find that even when you take a large city, their boundaries tend to be very restricted. You might find actually the major, let's say, industries or activities that pollute the city are located outside the city boundaries. and the city authorities might not be able to act. So also being able to engage with the national government that has a wide mandate, we also found that it's a complementary partnership to kind of cause action. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Engineer. Maybe I can ask if Olamide or I think maybe Olamide might have a comment on the question of resources. Or I see Monika, you've got your hand raised. Let's see if you'd like to comment on that before we move on.
Okay. Thanks, Jan. I just made a comment in the chat. It's unfortunate that someone from C40 couldn't join us, but C40 basically is a collaboration or like a partnership of at least 100 mayors across cities across the world. And they have a Breathe Cities initiative where they have guidelines and policies in place that these mayors have signed and actually agreed to for implementation in the next, I don't know how many years. But just as an academic institution or an NGO, it's very hard to actually demand follow through from governments, because like Engineer also likely touched on, these things come from national and multilateral agreements, usually emanating from UNFCCC and COP that governments sign up to. And then these are then broken down into more local targets. So city governments usually have signed up to these, and some haven't, some have. For example, I know you mentioned mining and gas flaring. So these are quite sensitive topics. For example, I think the city of Johannesburg, if I'm not mistaken, has signed up as a C40 city, but there are a lot of things that happen politically that somehow a lot of that gets sidelined. I don't think I'm the best person to speak to this, but just to say that it's much broader than an academic institution or an NGO forming a partnership with a local authority. Thanks.
Monika, while you're online, I've got a question for you, which I'd like to take further in. And I do think it's important that we think about action and what does it mean in the end. But you mentioned the importance of thick data and how that gives additional insight. And I'd like to hear from your experience of having engaged with cities in terms of developing the policies in the end, or developing or advocating for policy development. What role does that play in the end? Does it muddle the waters for you in the end, or do you think that it actually, I mean, I don't know, I'd just like to hear your experience from that.
Yeah, I think a good example is probably if you look at storytelling as a measure, as a way of convincing. A lot of times seeing numbers, people usually gloss over when they see like a lot of numbers. So it's how do you then interpret that and how do you make that more compelling to someone hearing the story. So for example, just telling them that children under 5 are more vulnerable to air pollution, as opposed to someone documenting their experience of maybe suffering from asthma and talking about how they, for example, can't live in Lagos because their asthma flares up. That's usually more of a compelling argument. And that's what you can use to build a narrative to actually convince someone on the human side from a personal narrative. Because we often see that policies are there, they're drafted, but they're just actually not, they're not translatable. A lot of times, a lot of these things are not accessible to the average person on the ground. So they'll know that, they won't even know actually that there's a certain policy in their city that says that air pollution must not exceed a certain threshold. They won't know about that. But if you can break that down and make it more relatable and actually supplemented with big data, we mean like lived experiences and the perceptions and the more of that compelling knowledge of multimedia. For example, we use multimedia in an app to supplement the air quality data that we collect with wearable sensors and AirQo. So that seeing that picture and the multimedia around it, like seeing an open drain, seeing a roadside cellar burning, that often then will incite more action than simply a number. So from my experience, that's what we've been at least trying to do in terms of building our narratives when we go to COP.
Thank you. And I assume that that one will have to have some balance in the end, I suppose, in terms of understanding the narrative, but also understanding the data in terms of what that might mean. I was really intrigued by your process that allowed for speed. and that one could use urgency to ultimately provide an overview of that. Now, maybe I can ask you to just reflect on what that means in terms of the data that you collect, and then I think engineer from I think the way you presented it, I think your reflection would be interesting as well in terms of what happens if we have this also this level of moving in, getting data, and moving out. What does that mean in it? I think Monika, start with you, and then engineer, and then I'll next question before will be there.
Yeah, I think air quality is a good example, because I mean the air quality changes by minute or by hourly averages. For example, wind can occur and then it's a completely different picture. So if with the tools that we have now for like analysis and data processing, we haven't had these tools before. But like platforms like we use the AirQo dashboard that shows in real time what the air quality data is like in different neighborhoods across, like particularly Lagos, for example, where we're working now. So this data allows people to actually take that into consideration and actually make like real-time, they can decide for themselves, like, am I going to go outside today and exercise? Will I go running in my neighborhood today? So having that accessible to someone in real time at least give them a certain sense of agency in terms of how do they navigate and interact with their built environment. I think one limitation we had last time was with actually then using those because we had done what do you call it, one time like cross-sectional intervention the first time. So then using that data to try and convince policy was a bit difficult. But I think now with the technology that we have and the tools, with the grant that we got now to scale up the low-cost sensors, it's going to allow for more, like deeper discussions and more meaningful engagements around the equality.
Thank you, Monika. I think that's interesting. So it's a question of scale as well in the end. That makes a lot of sense. Engineer, I'd like to just, if you can reflect on this, what from your experience having worked in multiple cities, how effective do you think is this if one just takes a quick snapshot of a city?
Yeah, thank you, Anne. I will ask you to please just rephrase your question so that I can get it clearly. Thank you.
I'm reflecting on the work that Monika and the team's been doing in the UrbanBetter Initiative, where it's often moving in really fast, collecting a lot of data that's in real time, presenting a quick snapshot of a city. And I'm just thinking from your experience of having worked in multiple cities and working with fixed sensors or not, is there a benefit to that? Is there a concern around that, or how do you experience this from the work that you've done?
Yeah, thank you. I think the impact of, well, the kind of the value of being able to present like live data or timely data, I think it's particularly important usually for raising awareness for citizens. I think one of the things that we see is that even for the citizens to be able to kind of see what are the contributors of emissions within the city without kind of tools where they can visualize. If you're able to kind of have a tool to say, well, if you ban, let's say, rubbish, you can see a spike in the levels of emissions. That does two things. One, it kind of shows the citizens that they become aware of the activities that are actually contributing to our emissions, but on the other hand, they also become aware, hopefully on actually what they can do to reduce on the emissions. I think one of the things that real-time data kind of enables is that level of awareness in terms of what can be done. When it comes to the communication of air quality data, I think one of the things that we've seen across the cities is that we also have to be able to communicate air quality data in the sense that individuals or even authorities can see that they can, the problem is manageable. So not presenting the data as well, the situation is way out of hand. So then everyone kind of, the citizens become like, helpless. The authorities also kind of see that this problem is, is huge. So being able to kind of even have a high resolution data, because if you take a large city, typically you have a high variation of the levels. You find that there are places that actually like, have good air quality, but then you have places that within fairly same distances, you see high variations. So being able to present these variations also in terms of space usually gives a bit of hope to the authorities that you can do certain things in certain neighborhoods and you can improve the air quality, or you can do certain things in certain neighborhoods and you make the air quality, worse. Of course, when it comes to the communication of the real-time data, I mean, that comes with its own risks, whereas it's very good at giving like real-time indication of the state of air quality there, but it's not necessarily data that then that would inform regulation, because regulations and standards usually rely on maybe averages of specified window. So these momentarily spikes in air pollution, and that data presentation is not necessarily good for the regulation, but it can be good for awareness of the sources, and also awareness of what individuals and authorities could do to improve air quality.
Thank you, Engineer. Thank you. That clarifies a lot. I really appreciate the fact that one understands the nature of the data and how it can be used and is useful in the end. If anybody has other questions, you're welcome to post it in the chat or just simply raise your hand, and we can ask the rest of the participants as well. While you're thinking of a question, I've got a question for Olamide. And this is going to be slightly difficult. I'm sorry for that, but I do think it's important to understand how you see the success of the work so far. Is working with communities in the end, and the ground level needs that was noted. How do one consider as an NGO the success of such projects? Where does it lie? Is it about the advocacy, or does it need to become action in the end? From your experience of having worked in a number of projects, that would be interesting. And then Jeremy, I see you've got a question as well. I'll hand over to you after this one.
Yeah, thank you, Jan. I'm sorry, I can't put on my video. It says not is disabled, but anyway, I'll speak about what you said. So the question is about where is maybe the impact or the success, and I think it lies in two places. So yes, of course, action is super important, and I think that is the end goal, because of course we want to see change. We want to see some impact on the lives of the people who are living in various communities and neighborhoods. And then obviously, again, even policy action is also important, because for example, we've been doing a lot of advocacy around non-motorized transport, and this year, Lagos State has said they've actually kind of accepted the policy for non-motorized transportation, NMT policy, but it's taken I think 4 or 5 years on this kind of where are we now with this? We wrote this, I don't know, 5 years ago. Can it come into practice? How is it going to come into practice, and so on? So we've seen that, and then also we've seen some action being taken from Lamata in terms of like mapping streets and starting to go on the ground themselves, and starting to start and getting budget allocated. So they're also doing advocacy on their own side in terms of getting budget allocated to some of these kind of walkability and non-motorized transport infrastructure. Then there's another side where it's about really the communities themselves having the data, the information, the ability to be able to ask and to be able to demand and be able to sit at the table with policymakers, with the technocrats within government, and say, this is what's happening in my community. This is where we need support. This is where you said you're going to build 10 roads this year, you haven't, or you said a hospital will be in this community and it hasn't, or you're going to improve the school and it hasn't. And I think that's also very important to be able to have that. Have that impact, or have that kind of, it's a success story to me if you can see that the community are even continuing some of these projects. Maybe you don't have as much funding. So for example, we had a project recently which again has been like maybe 2 or 3 years in trying to advocate for a community for an allotment garden within a very kind of violent community, and using this space instead of for like drugs and so on, but changing it into a garden and into an allotment garden, basically have public space as well as agricultural produce. And it's only now that the community has really taken it upon themselves, and we said, just go ahead and do it. The local government has also said go ahead and do it. The state government are still yet to kind of provide the backing for them to do it, but they've started themselves. And I think that's, again, a success, because fine, it's not the full-on project that the state government, that we presented to the state government, but however, it's a start, and the communities themselves have taken it's their own initiative, basically, to start it, to get it going. We've provided some capacity building and some training, but they're doing it themselves. And I think, and then going back to Lagos State government and saying, we've started this, what we need your support to kind of keep going. So I think that's also a success, in itself as well. So I think that there are a variety of ways to say what success is, and I think, yeah, for me, those are the ways that I see it.
Olamide, thank you. I think that continuity is really, I think, important. I think as you highlighted, and then being able to get communities to talk on the same table and have the tools to communicate and engage with city officials. I think that's such an important aspect you noted there. Thank you. Jeremy, I see you've got a comment or question.
Okay. I think just to start off with, thank you for the very interesting presentations. And I think what's clear to me is that there's some very interesting tools, methodologies that can be used to start tackling quality of life in cities. And some of the stats are just amazing. This idea of kind of 22 million trips in a day. And I think what I'm hoping is that this presentation, and hopefully you are able to kind of share some of this data more widely, because I think it's the sort of data and information that really is needed very widely to start thinking about urban problems. But my question is really, now that you've started building this base of data, you've built some of the methodologies, what are the next steps? How do you take this forward? And there's 2 or 3 interlinked questions, because one of the kind of key questions, and I think you've all made this clear, is that we live in African cities and they are different. We want them to be a particular type. So one question is kind of, what is that ideal African city urban environment that we want to? Because I think if we can define that very clearly, then we can work towards that, and that's where the data then becomes quite useful. So that's the kind of first thing, is kind of where are we heading and what does that look like, and define it. And I think what is participatory, defining of that kind of target environment in 10 years time or in 5 years time for a particular neighborhood, for a particular city. The next one is then to go back and say, okay, what are the kind of carrots and sticks and methods we can use to build towards that? Because clearly you have the data, but are there carrots, are there sticks in the way we use that data? And the first thing is this: the stick is just pure embarrassment. If you say 50% of the time the data shows that you are well over WHO or whatever the benchmark is, that's acutely embarrassing, for government, for the key role players, but also for, donors, for international finance, etc. So that's very useful, and to show that graphically, to show a city with the hotspots that show the levels of pollution, and just make that visceral, in terms of kind of what are the effects. If you live in the city, you lose 5 years of life because of air pollution. So there's an area there that I'd be very interested to see how you take your data, and really kind of drive it home to the key role players. And I think you've started exploring that, and I'd be very interested to know how that might work. But also this, going back to the benchmarks, the targets, because when you talk to a community, what is acceptable and what isn't? And I think, when we talk about science, often we talk about kind of lay communities who may not, have a good grasp on this. And again, that's a really interesting area of research. How do you, define what's acceptable? Because if it's unacceptable, then people mustn't accept it. And then what does that mean? So we've talked a little bit about the sticks. Now, what are the carrots? And I think the situation is across the continent, we have very limited urban capacity. Our municipalities from city of Joburg, Cape Town, all the way through don't have specialists. They aren't, air quality specialists. They're not even some of the kind of basic, urban planners, urban designers, etc. And I think part of what this sort of work needs to do is build evidence-based solutions. So if the data, and perhaps maybe if you share your data more widely, and more researchers are able to use it, you can build those cases. So for instance, if there's a lot of trucks coming in a particular time of the day, that coincides with people, you get very high levels of pollution, and you get, people then experiencing that pollution. And if the data could say, look, let's change the hours, let's change the schedules, that's a very clear policy decision that you can drive through to municipalities, and they can implement it very easy. They can change the schedules, they can change the laws, and to me, I think that's going to be a brilliant step to kind of build really good local, solutions that take you towards this, environment that we want to get to, this very high quality African city, neighborhood type environment. So that's really, it's a kind of mixture of some questions. I hope that's okay, Hugh. Jan, thanks.
Thank you. Jeremy, I think we've got a few questions, but maybe I can ask, as closing for our speakers, what would be the next steps for you to take further this idea of building solutions? That might be a good place to also close off this session. Let's start with engineer. What would it mean for you, or for the work you're doing?
Yeah, thank you so much, Jan and Jeremy, for those insightful thoughts. Some, going a bit into the future in terms of where this work can go. Maybe just to, briefly speaking to the future. As I started off, we kind of envision a future where, everyone who lives in an African city, they can be able to, breathe clean air. And that's like hopefully the ultimate goal we are looking at. But that's very, very far in the future. So I think in the short term, we really would like to see at least, data being used, by citizens as well as authorities when it comes to making decisions around, either city planning or even living in the city on a day-to-day activities. I think what would, hope is that, with the data that we are giving to the authorities and the communities, can we hopefully at one point see that people who are living in these cities, they can start to place, for instance, air quality as maybe a #1 issue in terms of why they choose to live in some of these spaces. If that happens, then it becomes easy to implement many other things, because then we'll have kind of a bottom-up, approach, have a demand-driven, policies. It's not, cities trying to do the policies, but the citizens are actually demanding for them, and hopefully this will trickle down into easy implementation, of the policies. In terms of what's on our radar for AirQo, we've been trying to see, the thing that we've been working on in some of the cities that we started. We started in East Africa, and we've been now moving, through the different partnerships. We've been moving into other parts of the continent. So we're trying to, put effort in terms of building like a community of practice for cities to have better ways of, managing air quality. So we have this. We've started this network, for instance, called Clean Air Forum, where we bring together city leaders and different partners like UrbanBetter and the others. We come together and try to kind of discuss the experiences across the continent in terms of what we can do to improve air quality, but also getting buy-ins and commitment from the city leaders in terms of the actions that they can take. We see there's been a bit of, at least in the last few years, we've worked with some cities, there is demonstrable actions, like cities are putting in place policies around air quality management. So I think it's the question on how do we sustain, or how do we put in some strategies to ensure that this is being self-sustained by the cities themselves, even without the academia or non-profit. How do we ensure that cities are taking this as #1 priority going forward? So these are some of the things that we are focusing on. And in terms of sharing the data, I think recently there've been quite a bit of examples, like from either citizens or researchers. You see that when they access the data, they take some action that kind of point to say that if we can be able to do this at a large scale, then we are likely to achieve the bigger impact that we want to see. I was in one of the meetings, and one of the residents from one of the cities in the northern part of Uganda, kind of mentioned that they used to think that living in the middle of the city was like very like attractive, and then they mentioned that after all these engagements with air quality and all that, accessing the data, they actually now took a decision as like to take their family to live outside the city. So trying to kind of think of how do we ensure that the data and the information we communicate is actually being used and interpreted to make a decision making. I think those are the kind of things that we would want to see, that we can move forward with partners to see that the data is not stopping at the numbers, as Monika and the others were saying, but we actually move it into collective actions, either from the government or citizens.
Thank you very much, Engineer. Yes, I think that, making a choice of where you stay based on the air quality is such an important thing to think through. But I do hope that one could see this community of practice developing further. I think that's such an important contribution. Monika, in terms of UrbanBetter and the work that you're doing there, where does this go now?
Thank you, Jan, and thank you to all the my co-presenters so far. So I just wanted to touch on 3 points. So on Jeremy's point about what is the ideal city, I would say an ideal city is an active city. So where urban planners actually see themselves as health practitioners and health is not an afterthought in urban design. Towards that, I'd say we need more like multi-sectoral collaborations where different sectors and departments speak to each other. But on top of that, being cognizant as well of balancing livelihoods with interventions and policy. So as we move towards the fossil-free future and the just energy transition, we also have to think about how do we balance livelihoods on top of that and do it in an equitable way. And then in terms of UrbanBetter, we're thinking more towards a scalable model because we aim to be at least to translate the model that we've used and the lessons and the tools that we've gained to be at least in 30 cities by 2030 and beyond. So we're building a social infrastructure that's connecting youth with the community. We've just recently started this in model in Lagos, where LUDI is actually hosting our first hub. So this hub is quite critical in doing the activations and the work that's more relevant towards the Lagos landscape. And we're also building a data infrastructure because we realize that we're now in the fourth industrial revolution and we have to use the power of data and technology. So this includes using a mobile app as well as a data infrastructure that allows young people to engage with static sensor data and the data that they collect and expanding these towards other aspects of planetary health. And we also want to foster the participatory mechanism of engaging youth in decision-making and in policy dialogue with decision makers. So yeah, that's basically my concluding points. So we're trying to create a scalable model that can be not only replicated, but adapted in other African cities and beyond. Thank you.
Thank you, Monika. I think, yes, I think that the idea of how we scale that, I see that as the extension of that community of practice, even in some ways, and it's just becoming the community of citizen scientists, really important in the process as well. And then last, Olamide, I do think Monika already noted that there's lots of work waiting for you in Lagos, but I'd love to hear from you. Where does this take you to take you further?
Yes, fantastic. So before I answer that question, I think one thing that was raised maybe a number of times is about how do we engage with government officials or at least get them to maybe act. And this has been something that we grapple with on a daily basis, I guess, at LUDI, because of course we are all in conversation, granted, but maybe not always moving at the same pace. So I think one thing, of course, have that continual collaboration, but I think also we've got to think about what motivates a government, and that's quite a big task. Because as I mentioned with the NMT policy, what has motivated in terms of transport infrastructure is not about walking, it's more about cars. So how do we start to shift that mindset? And I know I'm talking not about air quality here, but it all kind of links together anyway. How do we shift the mindset away from kind of what is happening now, what was happening on an individual level, but as a government level, and that is really, really tough. And if anybody knows the answer, we will all take it. But I think it's something that we have to think about, and we as academia or organizations have to also start to grapple with, but also even working with the private sector as well. And they also play a key part in decision making. So we also have to keep them in the conversation as well. And then in terms of next steps, yes, of course, we have the UrbanBetter Hub, in Lagos. I think, to be honest, UrbanBetter is doing and the hub and the citizen scientists are really doing a great job and work in regards to bringing kind of this idea of citizens-led collected data and really kind of pushing it to those who are living in the city, but also to those who are governing the city. And I think the model, and I always advocate for it, but the model is really, as you said, should be kind of be able to be replicated. And I think Monika has mentioned that, the idea of kind of, taking it to different cities, but not just for air quality. I think the model can be used for a variety of different different things, especially thinking of the youth that we have on the continent, and the fact that we are a youth heavy continent. And again, they are the majority of those who are living in the cities. So I think it's the model is really is pertinent, and that we need to kind of keep using it for other using that model for other kind of advocacy and around kind of climate resilient cities. And then for LUDI, I guess with the walkability assessments, we're not pushing the walkability assessments on communities, which is something that we really don't want to go into a community and say you need to do a walkability assessment. No, we are sharing the tools with communities, and it's really for them to say, oh, can you support us with doing this and collecting the data and measuring the data, putting it into a format that we can share with government officials, and especially at the local government level, because we usually work on the state government level because they are the ones that act, but the local government act on a very local level and can make change on that extremely kind of neighborhood level. And so we really want to put that empower that level of government to really act as well. So that's what we're doing with the walkability assessment. So thank you, and
Great. Thank you very much. Thank you to all three of my speakers today. I really appreciate the work that you're doing, and as Monika noted, the cities that we hope that we'll build in future. And I was thinking of the work that Olamide has shown in terms of, if we're building cities for people that would be walking, would it be the same as the cities that we used to build if they're car-centric? And it's not. It needn't be. And I think that's it. And therefore, we need the data, and we need the individuals, we need the citizens, and we need ultimately cities and governments and to buy into this alternative dream, which is not that alternative, it's just logical in many ways. As you see, large portions of the communities are already walking for that matter, and that's really how life is in that way. So thank you for your presentations, and thank you for everybody that joined the session. I really appreciate the time that you've set aside to see the work that's coming from Africa, which hopefully we can share with the rest of the world. This is being recorded, so we will share this on the CIB YouTube platforms for others to review again. If anybody's interested, you can email me. I'm going to just add my email address. If you're interested in the seminar, in joining a seminar, suggesting a theme, or even if you're interested in contacting any of the individuals that have presented here, I think if you didn't get their email addresses, you're welcome to email me, and I will connect you with them. I think that the work that they're doing is really valuable. And then for what's coming, we've got three seminars that we're busy planning and getting the last speakers involved. One will be on regenerative design thinking, some really interesting speakers that's joining us there. The second is looking at indoor environments and indoor built environment qualities. How do we improve it? How do we work with that? And then lastly, a session on education of sustainable design and sustainable architecture, or sustainable built environments, and the education process of that, and how do we improve it, and how can we innovate on that? So watch the space. We'll share more through the CIB networks and through the other networks. Thank you for all that shared the work. And the contact so far. And then Jeremy, thank you for starting the session and for also supporting us in this process. You should all have a lovely evening. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you. Thanks a lot.
Bye.
Bye.